Hello, thanks for tuning into the Arcimoto podcast. Today we have with us Mark Frohnmayer, the CEO, founder of Arcimoto, along with the Equal Vote Coalition on your shirt. How goes it?
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Truly.
Thank you for having me on the show and for your patience on the in terms of the time it took to get me up here.
Yeah, absolutely. You got a lot of kind of moving parts. It's always good to come on right after a big event.
A few irons in the fire.
A few irons on the fire. You just had the stakeholder meeting, right?
That's true. We had it. Well, we did our first quarter report, and in conjunction with that, we do a stakeholder webinar, talk about the state of things.
I like it. How are the state of things? For recap for people who didn't watch that.
Well, for people who didn't watch it, I'd suggest that they hit play. It's very fresh. It's Monday. But I think for me, the word that I use to describe what's going on is acceleration. We are, the team right now is clicking. We have brought on 3 executives in the last several months that are really passionate, incredibly talented people that are filling in and kind of shouldering some of the big pieces of the venture. And it's that plus just the fantastic team that has been developing over these last several years. It's just humming.
Absolutely. I mean, Arcimoto's 270 some odd large. What's it like moving to a company of this size, having Arcimoto for a decade be a much smaller crew?
Yeah, for the first 15 years, or for the first 10 years, we were, sort of fluctuated between 1 and 20 people. And then we have definitely grown substantially in recent years. What is it like? It is I think, and this is another thing I talked about on that call, is just the biggest challenge that I see is, it's a fuzzy word, but it's leadership. It is making sure that we're all rowing in the same right direction. And that's pretty easy when you're a small startup with everyone sitting around a few desks in the same room. But when you are 275 people spread out across multiple locations around the country, around the world, that becomes a much more complex problem in terms of making sure everybody's on the same page and doing the right things, and it's pushing forward in the same direction. And it's the people challenge that to me is probably the most significant growth challenge.
Yeah. Did you say the Dave Frohnmayer quote, the leadership is?
So my dad was, and he had a political career that began really the year I was born, and then went on to become the president of the University of Oregon. And what he distilled over time was that, leadership was something that he actually taught. So every year he would teach a freshman leadership seminar to incredibly bright kids coming into school. But he was firmly convinced that leadership is latent within all of us, that it can be taught, that it can be learned, and that its pursuit is of the utmost importance.
Yeah. And so do you find that kind of with Arcimoto? Because, 1 to 70 people, you get a personal, every single one. And now it's kind of you have to inspire something within 270 people. It's got to be a lot different for you.
I think we're in an age now where it is actually a little easier to keep track of a lot more people, just in terms of we've got tools that let us be present with each other even when we're very geographically separated. You think about, I don't know, how many kids were in your high school?
No idea. Let's say 2000.
Yeah. So, but I think South had 1,600 kids. I mean, we knew hundreds of each other.
Yeah.
So you can know a lot of people, but then when it comes to organizations, it very quickly things can, a culture develops and people can establish fiefdoms and silos and say, throw things over the wall for somebody else and say, hey, it's their problem that this didn't get done. Mm-hmm. So getting a group of people to all own the problem, to own the solution, and to really focus on working together effectively. It takes a commitment to growth, like actual individual growth and learning for all of us. And so it's one of the things I've really been focusing a lot of my communication time on with the team is just honing in on basic stuff. I love design. I love drawing pictures of cool future new things. And that's where I really started a lot of the effort was just kind of thinking, what is the architecture of the product? But when it comes to taking that product to scale, the really hard problem is getting a team of tens, then hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands to all be rowing in the same direction.
Yeah. And so what does your communication with the team look like? Not a lot of people are CEOs. They don't know what an actual day in your life looks like.
Well, we've really embraced the work from where you are modality, using tools like Zoom and Teams and electronic communication modes to be able to communicate with each other effectively in terms of meetings. And I think that's been one of the things that's really let us both accelerate pace and then also bring in experts and people from all over the place. In the past, if you wanted to bring somebody on board the team, they'd have to sell a house, buy a house, load up a truck, move across the country. Big move. Now, a lot of people are where they want to be and have living within their own communities. But when you're on the Zoom, you can still all be on the same team in a laptop.
So how does finding people like Dwayne and Lynn happen? Like, do you just kind of say, we need to fill this position? You look at everyone in the U.S. or worldwide and you say, I'm going to make them an offer. How does that work, bringing on kind of a new executive position?
They came to us in different ways. Lynn, who had a great career at Tesla during the Model 3 ramp in terms of the customer experience piece, she did a stint at Electromechanica and then left and reached out to us. In the case of Dwayne, he was a recommendation from Kevin O'Rourke, who he had worked with at Arrow, and said, Kevin just said, this guy is an absolute rock star at product development. He's really, after leaving Arrow, he's kind of going into consulting mode. We could bring him on for, a short stint or whatever. And then we invited him out and he took a look at what we were doing and said, I want in.
That's awesome. So that's where we are today. To rewind it about 14 years, what was the genesis of Arcimoto, in case the story hasn't been told? Maybe people have heard it before.
The genesis is a whole series of poor life choices. In 2007, we sold Garage Games. I was a co-founder of a video game startup here in Eugene, and sort of traded my equity in that for cash. And then I didn't really know what to do with cash. I knew what to do with code. And so, but at that time, there was it was very clear to me that the writing was on the wall in terms of the climate. And so I just decided I'm going to take the resources that I got out of Garage Games and apply them to pressing problems in the world. And when I didn't initially ever consider starting a vehicle company. I went looking for a vehicle to buy. I wanted something that was electric, obviously. I wanted something that was affordable because I wanted to adopt something that if I adopted it, then other people could actually adopt it. You know, for it to be a real sustainable transportation solution, the solution's got to be affordable for the mass market.
Yeah.
And at that time, I started searching, and I couldn't find anything that met, kind of a reasonable bar of quality, solved the types of trips that are common, and that had the right footprint. It was like either get a golf cart or put down a deposit for a Tesla Roadster.
Wow.
And those were sort of the choices that bubbled up at that point. There were some interesting projects going on overseas. There were tons of companies that had done prototypes, and this was things like the Carver, a whole host of good ideas that just never made it to production. And then I went to a parade. So that was the search that was going on. I had cash in the pocket. I was under the mistaken illusion that I was some kind of great entrepreneur because it's sort of like if you play baseball and for the first time you swing the bat and it goes out of the park, you think you're like an amazing baseball player. Turns out there are varying levels of difficulty in different endeavors, and computer games versus vehicles is just orders of magnitude of difference.
Do you not code anymore, like at all at Arcimoto? Or?
I don't. I occasionally, when I get a chance to take a long train trip, I will open the laptop and take the several hours that it takes when I have no connectivity to get back into that state of mind, figure out where I'd put my pen down on some long-running projects that I would still like to get done.
Tribes 3's coming out? Confirmed?
No, there are a couple that are still brewing. One is a programming language, the other is productivity software. For me, programming just requires an intense amount of focus and flow, and right now the demands of Arcimoto are so ADD in terms of just helping everybody else get done what needs to get done, that it doesn't allow for those long uninterrupted stretches of time to get some serious hacking done.
So do you wake up in the morning and just like start tackling things, as they come in?
On the days when I'm doing the right thing, what I do when I wake up is I do a 30-minute sit, do some yoga, go for a run. Those three make for epic days.
Nice.
And then just dive into it.
It's cool. Without any like replan, like I need to do this, and this week. Like you probably just wake up to 30 emails and say, I'm going to kind of tackle
30 would
those.
be an understatement. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, there's a ton of inbound from all corners, and then it's the great thing now, and this is something I did reflect on, is that last Friday was the best executive meeting I've had in 15 years at Arcimoto, because we just have the right. It's like I've been able to take these big pieces that I've been carrying and hand them off to very capable, seasoned folks across them, and not just me. So Jesse's been able to shift a bunch of the stuff that he's been carrying. Terry's been able to shift some of the stuff that he's been carrying. And so really filling out that team, I think, has given me it let me be more in just, nudge and sculpt mode, instead of just always, there's, fighting some fire.
Yeah.
So, and that I think is going to be, it gives me great confidence as we move forward, in terms of freeing up more of my mental bandwidth to focus on bigger picture, longer term stuff. And then just knowing that we've got great people in the seat, to go tackle each of the big steps.
That's incredible news. Going back to the story of the Genesis, I'm really curious. Doug settled on his episode, which hasn't aired yet. Did part of a role that kind of went into making Arcimoto go, Lynn didn't want you to have a motorcycle or it was too dangerous? Was that all a factor?
I didn't ever really want a motorcycle. I have taken one ride on the back of a motorcycle. This is, I don't know, 25 years ago or something like that. And it was that feeling of just, anything goes wrong and you're toast.
Yeah.
Does not for me provide a thrilling experience. It actually takes away from it. I like that experience. I love the experience of being in the world. I love riding my bicycle. I love just the engagement with the world. I like having a transportation device that is appropriately sized for a human, which cars are not. No. But sort of that safety trade-off was one I was just never willing to make.
So once you kind of had the FUV, did you still want a little bit more? And that's kind of what brought, like, what brings new models like the Liberator and Roadster? Is it just you kind of say, like, I still want a little bit more freedom and motorcycle-like, so you get rid of the roll cage?
The Roadster came about for it was just a prototype that was kind of gathering dust. The Roadster is the purest incarnation of the Arcimoto platform, the FUV platform, because it's just the sort of electromechanical horse. What I found when I actually finally took it out for a spin is that it also, because you're not belted in, you can move your body to where your body needs to be in the field of gravity, and it's the FUV platform is really well ballasted in order to carry the cage and the occupants and so on. But when you take that mass away, it gets even more amazing. And it was just this absolute joyful experience. And I think there too, it was having three wheels and a stable platform. It's just, to me, still felt I was able to get over that. It crossed my safety threshold. So safety is this spectrum, right? It's from, there are people who will play bagpipes riding unicycles fast downhill, all the way to people who will only drive a, large Volvo or Tesla car with everything in it. But for me, there's like what will I do? What want I do? And the Roadster definitely, for me personally, it just feels great.
Yeah.
But the goal, so like the Mean Lean Machine, there's still always been a goal to continue to drive down the sort of the weight of the platform, the embodied energy, the materials. I mean, every single pound that goes into a vehicle is an extracted, highly refined, energy intensive, destructive ultimately in terms of how we get those resources. And so the less we can use, the better. And that's really what also has been is very cool about that is that it is, continues to push the fun factor.
Yeah. That's a joy. The other big part is like when vehicles are made across the country or across the world, they have to be shipped all that distance. We're actually made here in America, which is kind of a really big point in terms of how much.
Well, you got to be clear when you say made in America. Made in America is and even built. We are assembled in Oregon. We are designed in Oregon, but we are the supply chain presently for Arcimoto includes parts from a lot of different places, and there's a content threshold before you can say made in America.
Interesting. So like every single component would have to come
it's
dug
not,
out
it's
of the
not every
soil
single
here?
one. I'd have to look up the legalese. There's some percentage threshold.
Yeah. Interesting.
And ultimately that is for sure the goal. It's not that it is not that every Arcimoto is a made in America product. We want Arcimoto products to be made here, wherever here might be.
Wow. And so is that kind of the basis of making such a nice lean design, is that other people can kind of crop it up and make their own manufacturing plants? Or?
That is the goal of the ramp, is to provide the template for scale replication.
Wow.
So it's not just that we want to build 50,000 units a year out of one facility. We want we're building the template and the communication processes and all of the documentation to be able to then take that template and copy paste it all over the place.
And so what would that look like if someone came and said, I want to start at my own ramp? Like, do you just have it all ready, or once the ramp's up and running, could you just kind of transfer
it is not all ready yet,
yeah.
But that's the game plan. And I want to skip back to that deliverator question, which is that the deliverator has been in the plans for many years. That the idea that the FUV platform would be a very flexible platform, that's been part of the game plan since 2014. When we really landed on Generation 8, it was clear that basic foundation could host last mile delivery, pickup truck like thing, commuter vehicle, a lot of different pieces, but ultimately the product is that platform.
What's your favorite platform, or your favorite product on that platform?
Favorite is favorite for what?
The one that you're like, if only one could exist, that's the one that I like and think, has the biggest impact.
Ooh, I don't think of it that way.
How would you think?
Because I think that the platform is designed around the vast majority of use cases for vehicles. So it's whether you're the usage pattern of how we use cars today is we almost always drive them alone or with just one other person and some small amount of stuff traveling a relatively short distance. And so it's solving that problem across all kinds of different verticals and different use cases. That it's the platform that really is my favorite thing of that. When it comes to my the experience of the ride, the Roadster is just an absolute joy machine. But I want to be able to use a Roadster when I want to go for a Roadster ride. I want to be able to use a FUV if I'm going to the grocery store, and if I'm delivering a bunch of gear, I want a deliverator.
Yeah.
So, or taking a bunch of tools around the flatbed. So it just depends on it just depends on what the need is for that particular trip.
I like it. And maybe to rephrase it, and you don't even have to go model specific, but what excites you about Arcimoto's future? Like maybe this really taking off in that direction.
Yeah, well, I should also add, we've had this kind of many shots on goal idea, and this is another thing that I communicated on the stakeholder update, is that many shots on goal strategy has crystallized into a first shot for the win approach, and we think that is the delivery and fleet opportunity. So that's where when it comes to 1.x, the first vehicles that come out for 1.x are going to be very finely honed for commercial applications. That's where we see, and that is what we think is going to be the catalyst in terms of the marketplace for giant scale.
Wow. And so that'll be mostly selling B2B. Could individual customers still buy that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's exciting. You don't have any plans of 1.x that you can share? That would all be way too far looking, isn't it?
We will not. When it's ready, we'll show it.
That's exciting. So looking back at the long journey that Arcimoto has been, how do you kind of fit other things like Marble It Up and Equal Vote Coalition in? Do you just 10 years in, you say, I really want to kind of start this up, and you just kind of find a different crew? And
So they've been kind of rolling in parallel for a lot of the time. Marble It Up came out of a game that we did at Garage Games called Marble Blast, which was itself an homage to Marble Madness. And Marble Blast, it took all the things that I really loved about sort of the first-person team action game genre and distilled that kind of pure gameplay into something that was non-violent, fun, family-friendly, super cool, beautiful things. And when Garage Games was wound down the first time, that game sort of disappeared. And so a few of us who were on the original team said, we should make a game that is an homage to Marble Blast, understanding really what was the core element of that, which was the experience, the feel of the game. And what actually prompted that was when Nintendo came out with the Switch. And I looked at that thing and I just saw that there was all the major publishers at that point had kind of poo-pooed the Switch, and they were like, it doesn't have the horsepower, it doesn't have the whatever, we're going to stay focused on PlayStation and Xbox. And that, to me, I was just said, this is an indie gaming opportunity like no other, because that platform is going to rock. And so that's how I was able to convince a team of my former compadres to pile in and marble it up.
And you also have some of your former compadres in Arcimoto, correct? Eric Fritz and Doug Fittipaldi are also kind of garage crew names.
Doug Campoli.
Doug Campoli. Woof. Those three synonym names.
that would be a strange blend. I've worked with those guys for a long time, and it is when you find seasoned, incredibly smart people that you are able to work with, it's good to keep them around.
Yeah, that's absolutely. So in the early days, it must have been really kind of vital to who are you going to pick as the first 2 or 3 people you pick on picks kind of the culture for the next decade and a half. I mean, has the culture of Arcimoto stayed pretty consistent?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, the first, everyone who's been a part of it has contributed to the culture. And I think what has linked us all at the root is just a very firm conviction that this is a problem we got to solve. And that's kind of the grinding stone of character that keeps us all going forward. And this is a critical problem for humanity to solve. And if what's getting in the way of that solution is how I interact with people, or the bad interpersonal habits that I've got, it's more important to fix those habits than it is to drop the quest that needs to be done.
Could you go more into detail of that? I'm curious, just in terms of how you as a CEO interact with kind of the team members.
Well, it's not just me. But I did realize at one point, when I started, I was just thinking I was just going to sort of fund it. So picking up on the previous thread, what actually got it rolling was I saw a kit vehicle in a parade called the Bug-E, designed by a guy named Mark Murphy down in Cresswell, 10 miles away. So Eugene has been kind of a hotbed for a long time of alternative vehicle development. Huge bicycle culture, a lot of thinking about the future of transportation, some real transportation visionaries. And Mark had done the Gizmo, as he was the designer of that, which was a three-wheeler in the 90s. So I was kind of vaguely aware of that one. And then I saw this Bug-E kit vehicle in the Eugene Celebration Parade in 2007, and that was the light bulb moment for that would eventually become Arcimoto, which was, and what the light bulb illuminated was the big gap between the bike and the car. And it was like, how did I not notice that there is a giant hole in the market between the bike and the car?
Have you told him the role he's played in Arcimoto's kind of genesis?
Mark?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, so we got a kit, and I convinced some of my mechanically inclined friends to help put it together. And it was in that putting together of that kit. Now when I saw it first, I was like, that's the thing. And then once we got it together and drove it, it was like, well, this is in the direction of the thing.
Was it 3 wheels or 4?
3.
3. Okay, so it was pretty close in the direction, though.
Yeah.
What were some of the early changes? So were the early changes to that what made Model 1 your first kind of prototype?
The first real change was the addition of a steering wheel. And that change went fundamentally unquestioned for 7 years, which was Anyway.
So it started off with a
eight
handlebar.
times a charm. Yeah.
It started off handlebar, switched to the steering wheel, back to handlebar.
Arcimoto's iteration for the first 7 years was largely, I would say kind of packaging studies.
Mm-hmm.
How do you fit people and stuff and batteries and motors and all the gear that needs to be in an electric vehicle? Where do you place it in space to make for a really kick-ass ride that solves the problem? Yeah. And if you look back on the history page of Arcimoto, you can see each iteration, and you can kind of go, okay, it was I kind of think of it as like a binary search through the field of three-wheeled vehicles, where it was like, okay, this is the next shot we're going to take, and then we would put the prototype out, put it in front of people, try it out, get a ton of feedback, and then each time it was, your princess is in another castle.
Mm. What was the kind of the telling point that the model that you landed on was finally like, this is the one, this is the prototype that we're going to actually make?
I was wondering if that's why you asked me to bring this folding chair over. It was the complexity of the car. A lot of the thing that makes that seating position makes the car big is that you're sitting in a very recumbent position. Your legs are kicked out in front of you, and that means that you have to, if you want it to work for a whole range of people, you have to have seats that move back and forth. You have pedals that have packaging in front of them for the throw of the pedals, all sorts of extra components and so on and so forth. And there was a sort of a moment of realization of, who really figured out the sort of the 95% solution for sitting are guys who make comfortable folding chairs. You go to an event or a wedding or whatever, and you've got a nice, comfy folding chair. Not like perfectly comfortable for everyone, but when you're sitting upright, feet on the ground, it fits a much wider group of people, and the amount of space that takes up is much less. Mm. So I invited Freedom over. Actually, I think he might have been living in the basement at that point. And I just said, hey, I'm going to sit in this folding chair, and I want you to measure me from the tips of my toes to my back and from the bottom of my feet to the top of my head, because I'm kind of the sizing dummy for Arcimoto, and just figure out what's that rectangle, how much space does it take up. And I just took that rectangle, overlapped it for the nested seating, and then put the drivetrain in the front and the swing arm in the back. And as soon as I'd done that just very basic packaging study, I just was like, oh, this is it. Because the real thing that I've been fighting through each generation, so in the early ones, it was sort of like add capability, mm-hmm. to meet what the market needed. Mm-hmm. Carries two people comfortably, dual motor front wheel drive for the right kind of ride experience. But in doing so, it kept getting heavier and heavier and heavier. Mm-hmm. And every time we tried to trim weight down, we just couldn't get to the point where we could deliver the product that would, at scale, be the right price, have the right amount of material, solve the problem. And as soon as I did that overlapping, it became clear that we were gonna lose hundreds of pounds of weight, be able to combine a lot of the elements of the chassis together, and sort of solve some of the vexing things like how do you get in and out of the back seat of a recumbent seated tandem vehicle. So in like one shot, and this was December 20th, 2014, I think the first moment where I was like, we might not be totally screwed.
And so what model or what prototype came out after that? What was the next? Was that 6?
Gen 8.
That was Gen 8, the SRK.
Yes.
And for people who may not know, what does SRK stand for?
Simple, reasonable, kick-ass.
And how'd you change to FUV, FUV?
John Freese.
John Freese.
John Freese and Jeremy Bronson were in Portland when we were shooting the first SRK product video. Mm-hmm. And after we did that shoot, they hung out, and John came to me and he said, we've got to rename this thing. We came up with a new name. It's the Fun Utility Vehicle, dude. And it took me a while to be willing to actually do that. But it is part of the reason is that when people would drive it, the feedback we would get over and over and over and over again is, this is so fun. This is so fun. This is so fun. So we'd started by sort of selling on saving the planet, but the response we got when people drove it was, this is the most fun I've ever had driving. This one woman was like, I feel like it's an extension of my will, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was ultimately the move to FUV.
I like it. And so if we get Jeremy Bronson, John Freese, the MLM name might get changed.
MLM is a pretty solid name.
It's a pretty solid name. It's fun. And so that's kind of what brought the MLM to just kind of 14 years later, 13 years, I guess it started kind of being made a year ago. How soon into the process of making Arcimoto did you wish you could have had the MLM kind of?
As soon as the idea popped into my head, it was instantaneous, and I knew we had to do it. And that was like early October of 2020. So, you know, we're in it was 2020.
Yeah.
We were in, pandemic mode, and I was sitting in my living room, open my eyes, and I see this bearded hippie rip by on a recumbent bike going way too fast with a big grin on his face, who I actually met down the street. Yeah. When we got the Gen 3 MLM on it, he lives just down the street.
Did you tell him about the MLM?
Oh, I did. Yeah,
everyone.
I did. But I saw this guy rip by, and I used to ride a recumbent bike. It's just a much more comfortable way to cycle, but there are design issues that with that type of a platform. But when I saw that, it was, and the craziest thing is almost the first thought that popped into my head is, I got to call Bob
Miles.
Yeah, Bob Mile. And I hadn't spoken to him in probably 2 years at that point. So I dug out his number, and he's like, hey, Mark, how's it going? What's going on? So we, compared our pandemic survival stories, and I just said, hey, Bob, have you ever thought about doing an e-bike class vehicle? And he said, it would totally work. What we've developed would work for an e-bike class vehicle, but they'd been so focused on, the motorcycle front end and the motorcycle class. And he and I had over many years had expressed a desire to work together on a program. But it was in the vehicle space, it's actually pretty tough for vehicle startups to work with each other.
Why is that?
It's simply because of I think the complexity and capital intensity of the space generally. When I thought about what would it take to make an electric Arcimoto Tilting Motorworks motorcycle class vehicle, that would mean going through that entire design exercise again, a huge amount of regulatory compliance testing. I mean, when you're building a heavy, high-speed vehicle, it's a much more difficult design challenge and engineering challenge. So we never found that kind of starting point until and again it was sort of this perfect storm because during the pandemic, that's when the e-bike market just started to go, rocket ship up. And so the design concept for the Mean Lean Machine came together very, very quickly. And it just in terms of what its capabilities needed to be, because we'd learned a lot of it on the FUV. Yeah. What do you need for a local get around thing to be able to do delivery, to be able to do commuting and so on. And as that came together and as we started working on it, and it also, that program drew in, because we did that almost entirely. MLM has been developed almost entirely externally to Arcimoto, because we had, the mainline focus is get FUV to scale. And so I didn't want to draw away from that effort in order to do a new thing. So it started out as this real skunkworks program, but it has drawn in just legends to help get it done. in terms of, on the electronics and software side, on the chassis and design side. Even Bob was, again, it was taking a bunch of expertise that was really largely outside of Arcimoto. Leonardo, who's at that point he was working at Bike Friday welding bike frames, and he's been an experimental bike designer for his entire adult career. And I said, hey, so I actually, I think I just ran into him on the bike path and said, Leo, hey, would you be interested in working on this cool program? And so that was it. That's been a really cool part of it as well. Is just and we're going to have there are more players that we haven't introduced to the stage that are going to be working on sort of the next iteration of the MLM. Again, external to Arcimoto, but part of the same team, definitely part of the same mission.
But you didn't keep Tilting Motorworks external. Kind of what led to their acquisition? Just the fact of you need to bring them in because you can't work with other electric vehicles.
It's just that's the fundamental technology portfolio for the tilting bike, and it has a bunch of applications outside of the Mealing machine. We actually, there's a whole roadmap of products based on that tilting technology that we think can fill in some very interesting gaps in transportation down the road. So initially we started with the agreement to agree, right? That we're gonna figure out a deal that works here to license the tech, but pretty quickly, part of it was just where the position that Arcimoto found itself in the market is I just decided, I want to not just have this for the MLM. I want Arcimoto to have this for a bunch of different things, and I want Bob on the team. And that was what prompted the push to acquire them.
Score. And you can't tell obviously what any of those things are. I think everyone's curious why it isn't in the Roadster FUV, but that's just
the Roadster FUV, the FUV platform is designed as an automotive style platform in terms of the suspension. It is a dual A-arm front suspension with half shafts in the front. So the drivetrain's in the front, and the articulation of the CV joints does not allow for the incredible lean angle and steering angle that you have on a tilting vehicle. And also, it's not the right. That platform is a fantastic platform, and it solves a huge number of work cases. If you've got a flatbed on a farm, you don't want it to lean. Yeah. If you've got a deliverator, you don't want it to lean. If you've got a fun utility vehicle and you just want to just cruise around on your motorized couch, you don't want it to lean. But there are definitely cases and customers who want to have that, leaning, fly the road motorcycle type experience. And that's what those products will be for.
That's exciting. And I guess unveiling at the 222 event must have been a really exciting moment because it's this thing that you'd kind of been thinking about since October of 2020. And finally, you can show the entire world,
Well, I also think of it as kind of, for me, and I think for a number of other people, really kind of an opus project that integrates a lot of things that we've all been wanting from the transportation space into one super ultra kick-ass product. So yeah, it was a good 14-year capper.
14-year capper, I like it. And here's to another 14. It'll be interesting to see as more ramps potentially could pop up around the world.
Yeah, I wonder what that. Well, so yeah, next time I come on the podcast in 14 years, we'll see what's transpired.
That would be really exciting. When you kind of came on here, I mean, we're close to an hour in, we're 50 minutes in. Do you have any topics that you're kind of like, man, I'd like to have talked about that? No shows asked me. I haven't talked about it in a speech.
Well, you pointed out my T-shirt earlier.
We haven't talked about it.
And I had a conversation just moments before coming over here with the executive director of the Equal Vote Coalition about the next move, which is star voting for Oregon. We're just going to do it. And we're going to start the petition. So it's star voting is our political reality right now, it's, for lack of a better word, a total shit show. And so and what's at the root of that problem is the method that we use to choose candidates on the ballot. We just went through a primary. There's here you've got a dozen candidates for an office, and you see this in every primary, just massive vote splitting. Mm-hmm. So when you only get one choice on the ballot, there's all this crazy calculus that you've got to do in your head. Well, I really like this candidate, but this one is more likely to win. And if I don't support the more likely to win one, then that one that I really don't like is going to win. Mm. And so I'm throwing my vote away if I vote for this one. And that ends up just poisoning the political process. The plurality voting is what leads to, it's one of the systems that leads to two-party domination, and it's what leads to the aggregation of all of these special interests inside of each party banding together to push minority viewpoints collectively over that 50% plus one threshold. And my first experience of that was when my dad ran for governor in 1990. And I remember sitting in the hotel room in Portland, watching the returns come in, and just he was Oregon's last liberal Republican. And I remember Ted Kulingowski, who was the governor of Oregon, after that at one point pulled me aside and said, I thought your dad was just incredibly lucky being a liberal Republican in Oregon. And what this is like right at the beginning of when the right started to go after, the sort of the far right started to primary candidates that didn't agree with their ideology, and they came to him at a Republican convention in Oregon, and they knew they couldn't primary him. I mean, he was in 1988. He actually won the nomination for Attorney General by both the Republican Party, and he was the write-in nominee for the Democratic Party. So he just had broad support. So they knew that they couldn't take him out in the primary. Mm-hmm. And what they said instead is, if you don't move your policies in our direction, we are going to run an independent candidate against you and make sure that you lose.
Wow.
So naturally, told them to take a hike, and they did what they said they were going to do. And so when I was I was in high school at that point, and I saw the returns coming in, it was like, and it didn't allow for a fair campaign, because every time, if you're that sort of man in the middle, and you're fighting where every move you make in one direction, you're pulling support from the other direction. So I saw a plurality win, and again, this is obviously personal opinion. I was related to the guy, thought he was just a great human being. And I thought that really democracy had not been served, and certainly not my idea of what the voice of the people is really all about. And that made me kind of swear off politics for a decade. Wow. And then saw that same thing happen again, in election after election after election, where the minority viewpoints were able to override the will of the people. Yeah. That's what really spurred my interest in voting theory and voting methods, is saying, well, is there a better way that we can cast our ballots that allows for a much more fair outcome for everybody?
Do European nations have more of this? Because they don't have a two-party system. They have, this is a very deep rabbit hole. The voting science is a very deep rabbit hole. There are places where you vote for a party instead of a candidate, where you get proportional representation. What star voting is designed to do, though, is to be just a drop-in replacement for the voting method itself, without changing, how many seats there are for each different geographical area, or saying we got to go to multi-member districts, or all this. It's like taking the basic American idea of representative democracy, where geographies have a representative and they send them off to the state house to do the will of the people, and just saying, let's figure out a better selection method for that person. That's exciting. And you came up with star by how? I mean,
whole series of poor life choices. It started in it actually started in 2011. So I'd been working with a political organizing group in Portland called the Oregon Bus Project. This is in like 2007. This is when, and I remember talking to a guy at that time. I was a big fan of of a system called instant runoff voting, which has now been rebranded as ranked choice voting. And I ran into a former Secretary of State, a guy named Phil Kiesling, who was at that point pitching the open primary. And in the problem that I think a lot of people see is that the primary system is super screwed in the sense that we now have more people not in a party than in each of the major parties, which means that and particularly in areas where you have one party that is dominant, whoever wins that primary almost always wins the general election, which means that the selection of the candidate is actually happening in the primary. The selection of the winner is happening in the primary. And so if you have in a district like the one that we're in, where it tilts heavily Democratic, then only a small minority of the people are allowed to vote on who will ultimately be that representative.
Wow.
Because whoever is selected there is going to always win the general election.
Yeah.
Right? So the problem that Kiesling and co. were trying to solve is that basic representation fail. And when I went and actually ran the numbers, in between those who aren't in a party and those who are dominated out in the minority party, it's a majority who don't get an actual voice in the selection of their candidates in Oregon. It's nuts. But when he told me about the idea for the open primary, I was like, well, that's just going to make the vote splitting problem worse. Because now you've got all the candidates in the same jungle primary, you've got one vote. And so, when they do it they do this in California, they do it in Washington, there are districts where just on the balance of candidates who are showing up for the primary, you can actually have two candidates who are both in the minority advance to the general election.
Oh, wow.
Right? Because if you've got, let's say you're in, some hippy-dippy county and 6 people are running on the Democrat side and 2 people are running on the Republican side, those 2 can both get the vote, right? Because the 6 are splitting it.
Yeah. Wow.
Even though the vast majority of that district supports one particular side or the other. And that's happened in multiple races. And so I kept seeing these things that were not solutions. And I told Kiesling about instant runoff voting. I was a huge fan of that. And he's like, people are never going to want to change the ballot, right? So, and it took a few more years, but the aha moment was saying, well, what if we did the open primary with approval voting in the primary? So it's a very simple tweak to the open primary idea. But you're not limited to one choice. Yeah. So in that primary, you can support all the candidates you like. And the 2 who get the most support are the ones who are the finalists, and they go off to the runoff in November. And the problem I had there was, my brother was in law school at that point, and I said, "Hey, John, why don't you take this open primary legal draft and just change it to add approval voting into it?" So he did. And then that just sort of sat on my computer for a while because, well, one, I was busy working with Arcimoto, but I couldn't, at that point, there was just sort of like no catalyst for getting people to really care enough. I didn't see any way to get any momentum behind it until 2013. And in 2013, the federal government shut down, and it was like, okay, this is one short window of time where people are actually going to care. And so in that moment, I submitted the petition to the Secretary of State. The Oregonian picked it up, and then the LA Times picked it up.
And this is almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then when the LA Times picked it up, I started getting phone calls. So I got a phone call from the Schwarzenegger Institute. And then a little bit later on in the year, I got a call from some guys who said sort of like, hey, we like your idea, and we think it's got real chance. We want to come out and meet with you. And that was, it ended up being, another one of these large groups who are really focused on election, just tired of the partisanship in the process, and knowing that we're just not getting the right solutions and the right conversation, and just seeing that wedge that's been driven further and further and further into the country because of how we vote. And so that's what that sort of started getting that ball rolling. And those guys said, well, hey, look, we'll back you with what it takes to get this over the finish line, but you need to go to your own state and community and get their support for it too. And so I did. I went back to the guys who did the open primary in 2008. I said, I've got this new thing, and they said, oh, that's a very intriguing idea, but it's a new thing. I don't know, but we'll kind of help you run that out. Ultimately, they elected to just rerun the open primary in 2014. And that's, so that's sort of where we parted ways for a bit. And I was unwilling to go forward on the old idea that I knew didn't work. And they were unwilling to go forward on a new idea that had not been done. But in that run, that's, and the push to just get it on the ballot. So by that time, and this is, the Democratic Party of Oregon insiders had been fighting the certification of the ballot title, because whenever you want to get a ballot measure done, it's got to go through multiple gates before you even can start petitioning on it. And so, that they were like, well, we kind of like things how they are. We're running the show here. Yeah. So, why don't you take your crazy idea and go do it somewhere else? And so they, were pushing to run out the clock, which meant that by the time we actually got a certified petition, instead of being able to do it with volunteers, it would have required, sort of a massive amount of cash to hire paid circulators, which ultimately the open primary campaign did, and that's how they got that on the ballot. But this was my first sort of experiment with going on YouTube, and I was sort of like, this is where the beginning of the Unfuck the Vote campaign. But if I don't know if I've shown you that video.
Kenzie and I watched it pretty recently.
It was a dark time.
We screenshotted the young Mark.
It was a dark time. I was pissed. Anyway, but at the terminus of that, and part of it too is my dad. My dad was dying of cancer at that point, and so it was like there was no way I was going to roll over on something that was to fix the problem that was really. I think that it had been illuminated when he was running for governor. But what happened after that campaign, and this is in the early summer of 2014, he got on a new med and miraculously recovered for a time. And we were driving back from Bend, and I just face planted the Unified Primary Initiative, grassroots, 3 weeks to get 80,000 signatures approach. But we're on the ride back, and I'm explaining to him kind of the equal and opposite nature of that, of what the ability to vote on every candidate. So when you can instead of voting for one candidate, if you can vote on each candidate and say yes or no to each candidate, what that means is that you and I can cast canceling votes, right? You can, for whatever way you decide to express yourself, for everyone you say yes to, I can say no. For everyone you say no to, I can say yes. And it's in that simple knowledge, you and I both have the same amount of power because we can always cast equal and opposite votes. If you're only limited to one choice, and there are two people that you like, and there's one person that I like, I've got effectively double the voting power that you do, because everyone who thinks like you is going to split their votes, and everyone who thinks like me is going to concentrate their votes on that one candidate. And so when I started explaining this kind of equal and opposite voting. He's like, yeah, people don't like that negativity thing. Yeah, you gotta think about it in a different frame. He's like, think about it in terms of balance. That you can always cast a balancing vote, and that became the test of balance and the equality criterion for voting, and the beginning of the Equal Vote Coalition. Yeah. And then we threw as all of this was sort of marching forward, we threw a conference in October of 2014, the first and only Equal Vote Conference, with the backdrop of the ballot measure that was on the ballot, the open primary. And we invited all of these, experts around the country who had been working on election reform, people who'd done the open primary in California, Rob Ritchie from Fair Vote, Clay Shentrup and Aaron Hamlin from the Center for Election Science, Eric McGee from the California Policy Institute. Anyway, a bunch of just really, Kate Brown, who was the Secretary of State at that time, came down for it. And we had a bunch of spirited discussion, debates. And at the end of that day, and it was actually Rob Ritchie of Fair Vote, and all these guys have just been tangling online, arguing for years and years and years, trying to get something done, but not agreeing with each other on the systems.
They're splitting their votes.
Yeah, totally. And Rob pulled me aside. He said, we've traded barbs online and on all that, but what if we work together on something where you can it'd be like a primary ballot for overseas voters where you can both approve and rank the candidates, where so that your approval would be for that primary stage, and then your ranking would be your runoff vote. Because when you vote overseas, you don't want to have to vote twice. And I was listening to it, and I've kind of blew it off because I was like, that would be a crazy looking ballot. But I was like, okay, let's think about this. And then I went out and had beers with Clay Shentrup, who is at the Center for Election Science, who's a big approval voting fans. And we were talking about it, and somehow in that conversation, that sparked the realization that when you have a score ballot, like a 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, that conveys both a measure of support and a ranking.
Yeah.
And score voting by itself, which is where you just add up all the scores, discards that preference piece. And so, and that's really, I think, what Rob and all of the diehard fans of instant runoff have been bagging on the approval and scoring systems for, is that the potential for people bullet voting in order to gain a strategic advantage and all this stuff. But in that combination of those two ideas, and particularly if you use a 5-star ballot that everybody understands, that you could fix kind of the gaming issue, fix the ballot complexity issue, fix the counting complexity issue. And that was the genesis of star voting.
And now we're in 2022, and you say it's a big year for what's going on.
Well, it's just been, it has now had the test of time.
Nice. It's
been petitioned a couple of times. It has been now adopted in a bunch of different organizations for decision making. We've run hundreds and hundreds of elections with many tens of thousands of voters on the Star.Vote site. It's a very simple algorithm to implement, and people get fired up about it. And so now it's time to do it. So the phone call I had right before coming over here was, we got to fix the political system. Yeah. And it's not about, one party is the bad party and one party is the good. You may believe that, depending on who you are. But really good people believe that a party that has other really good people in it are the bad people, and that they're the good people. And I think a lot of it is just that it's been the promotion of these, again, things that are really very minority viewpoints banding together to get to 50% plus one. That's what drives the wedge. And so, again, star is just, it's a 0 to 5, 0 bad, 5 good, same as any review on any site that you've been on, Amazon, Google, whatever. And then the tweak is how it's counted. So the two who get the most support from the most number of stars, those are the finalists. And then your vote, your one vote, goes to whichever one of those two you gave more stars. And if you gave them both the same amount of stars, that's a vote of no preference.
Oh, wow.
Right? You give two candidates 5 stars, they're both the finalists in that count. You win either way. But if you have any preference between any of the candidates in the field, you can very easily express that with 6 different levels.
So there's 0 votes too? 0 through 5?
Yep.
6 levels.
0
okay,
5.
wow. That's awesome. That's really exciting, and I hope 2022 is a good year for it.
Well, I was just glad that when I talked to Sarah, she agreed, and so she's going to take that ball and run with it.
Score. That's exciting. Next time you come on, you
Star.
hopefully have a list. I love it. Thank you for the longest by over 2x podcast.
Whoa,
over an hour.
We're over an hour.
Hour and 10, but we could keep going. It could be a 3-hour.
Hey, let's save it for the next one in 14 years.
That'll be good. That'll be good. Thank you very much for it. Could almost be split into 2. 40 minutes of Arcimoto, 30 minutes of Star.
Let it run. You gotta get bring back the Rogan long multi-topic discussions.
Build some background to it all. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. Hope everyone has a wonderful day. And
Thanks all. See you out there.